to Graduate Guru. Today we are starting with a new topic which is buyback of shares. Now when I say buyback, हम उसे दो parts में divide कर देंगे. So I am buying something and I am buying it back. मतलब मैंने ही कुछ पहले बेचा हुआ है which I am getting back or buying back from that person who bought it. So here what are we going to buy back? We are going to buy back shares. Any company we know does not function without share capital. कंपनी में सबसे पहला रिक्वायरमेंट है शेयर कैपिटल. कंपनी जब स्टार्ट होती है तो आफ्टर फिनिशिंग ऑल द फॉर्मेलिटीज द फर्स्ट थिंग दैट अ कंपनी डज इज इश्यूज शेयर्स टू द पब्लिक. शेयर इश्यू करना मतलब पब्लिक को शेयर्स बेचना. सो दैट इज व्हेन द कंपनी sells its shares. After the shares are issued, people pay the money and then shares come into the picture and balance sheet में वो shares दिखाई देते हैं on the liability side as share capital. Now sometimes what happens after a few years of functioning, the company feels के share capital ज़्यादा हो गया है. There are various reasons why the company wants to reduce its share capital, and that is when they follow the procedure for buyback. Means अपने ही shares जो उन्होंने पहले public को बेचे थे, they buy it back from the public. Okay? Now there are three main ways of doing this. So the first is repurchasing the shares from the shareholders. So here what we will do is we will circulate a notice and we will ask the shareholders, उनकी मर्जी जानेंगे whether they are willing to sell the shares back to us. Okay? So that is a direct approach to the shareholders. And that is what we are going to do in this chapter basically. So in our chapter, what we are going to look at is this, repurchase from the shareholders. Another is when directly the company buys from stock exchange. What is a stock exchange? It is nothing but your share market, where different companies के share बेचे और खरीदे जाते हैं on a daily basis. We all know, we see the share prices rising, falling. Okay, so we talk about the basic index of the shares also. So basically what the company will do, it will not even tell the shareholders that it is buying back the shares, but धीरे धीरे stock exchange से ही अपने थोड़े shares वापस खरीद लेते हैं at the market price. Whatever बाहर के लोग जितने में shares बेच और खरीद रहे हैं उतने में ही कंपनी अपने ही shares खरीद लेती है. So that is another way. The third way is buying from the employees. Now which are these shares which were given under the sweat equity option? Now in issue of shares, when we do the topic issue of shares, generally we come across this. This is a special option given to the employees. Employees को company अपने shares बेचती है. Instead of giving them a bonus or something, the company prefers to give them shares under this sweat equity option, जहाँ पर employees के पास option होता है that they can buy the shares at a rate much less than the market price. Okay, so we are not going to go into this because this is not under the purview of our topic just now, which is basically buyback of shares. So as we saw, there are three ways in which a company will buy back the shares. Repurchase from shareholders. I will approach the shareholders, tell them that I want to buy back the shares at that particular price. Okay, and the shareholders will agree, disagree, whatever, how many ever agree, उतने shareholders के shares हम खरीद लेंगे at that given price. या फिर हम shareholders को बताएंगे ही नहीं, directly stock exchange पर हम अपने shares ही खरीद लेंगे. या फिर हम एम्प्लॉइज से उनके जो स्वेट इक्विटी ऑप्शन वाले शेयर्स थे वो खरीद लेंगे. इन शॉर्ट, आई एम बाइंग बैक माई शेयर्स, मेरा शेयर कैपिटल रिड्यूस होगा. नाउ देयर आर वेरियस रीजंस क्यों करते हैं ये. कंपनी का शेयर कैपिटल दिख रहा है लायबिलिटी साइड में, देन व्हाट इज द रीजन दे वांट टू रिड्यूस इट, कम क्यों करना चाहते हैं. सो लेट्स सी सम ऑफ द रीजंस why a company buys back its own shares. So the first reason is to avoid losing controlling interest. Sometimes what happens is that हमने कंपनी शुरू की, we are the founders of the company. Our company grew big. We started selling shares to the outsiders. Outsiders started buying these shares. और हमें लग रहा है कि हमारा जो कंट्रोल है कंपनी पे, to have a control on the company, you need to have at least 51% shares of that company. Then you have a controlling interest in that company. Means my decisions will be accepted. Okay, that is controlling interest. So when I feel that outsiders are buying more shares than what I have, I might lose the controlling interest. बाहर वालों के पास 51% से ज्यादा shares हो जाएंगे, मेरा controlling interest चला जाएगा. I will have to follow the decisions that they make. So ऐसे situation में when the company feels that it is losing its power, it might buy back the shares. ऐसा करने से क्या होगा, बाहर के शेयर होल्डर्स के शेयर्स हम बाय बैक कर लेंगे, हमारे शेयर्स हमारे पास ही रहेंगे. आई विल नॉट गिव माई शेयर्स फॉर बाय बैक, सो दैट आई स्टिल हैव मोर शेयर्स देन द आउटसाइड शेयर होल्डर्स. सो दैट इज वन मेजर रीजन व्हाई कंपनीज गो फॉर बाय बैक. द सेकेंड रीजन इज व्हेन वी वांट टू इंक्रीज द वैल्यू ऑफ शेयर्स. Now, how will this happen with a buyback? What is the value of share first of all? Value generally when I talk about, it is the net asset value. Now, how do we find net asset value? I'm sure you've done this in another topic. We calculate the total assets of the company. That is assets minus liabilities. जो net assets होते हैं कंपनी के, हम वो कैलकुलेट करते हैं और we divide it by the number of shares. Just to give you an example, suppose a company has 1 lakh assets and say 20,000 of liabilities. So 1 lakh minus 20,000, मेरे net assets हो गए 80,000. Now suppose the company has 8,000 shares. So 80,000 divided by 8,000, 10 rupees is the value per share. अब जो ये net asset value हम determine करते हैं, it has an impact on the market value of the shares. So when I do a buyback में क्या होगा? Buyback में shares का number कम हो जाएगा. Suppose हमारे एग्जाम्पल में 8,000 shares में I bought back 4,000 shares. Okay? So now suppose the net assets remain exactly the same. Okay? For whatever reason, 80,000 ही है net assets, but shares अब कम हो गए, 4,000 हो गए. So value automatically double हो जाएगी. Value will become 20. So this will have an impact on my market value of shares also. So because मेरे बैलेंस शीट में शेयर्स की वैल्यू बढ़ गई है, मार्केट में भी उसकी वैल्यू बढ़ जाएगी. एंड ऑफ कोर्स द शेयर होल्डर्स ओनली बेनिफिट फ्रॉम दिस बिकॉज देयर पर शेयर वैल्यू इंक्रीजेस. सो दैट इज वन ऑफ द रीजंस व्हाई कंपनी गोज फॉर बायबैक. द थर्ड रीजन इज टू इंक्रीज द अर्निंग पर शेयर. Earning per share, also known as EPS, earning per share. Same way, जो हमारी कंपनी का प्रॉफिट्स है, सपोज द टोटल प्रॉफिट ऑफ अ कंपनी इज 1 lakh, नंबर ऑफ शेयर्स इज 10,000, 1 lakh डिवाइड बाई 10,000, द अर्निंग पर शेयर, हर शेयर होल्डर का कितना प्रॉफिट हो गया? 10 रुपए. नाउ व्हेन आई बाय बैक द शेयर्स, सपोज शेयर्स 10,000 से 5,000 हो गए, जस्ट टू गिव यू एन एग्जाम्पल, अगेन द अर्निंग पर शेयर विल double. It will become 20 because I'll divide that same 1 lakh now by 5,000 and not by 10,000. So these are small values which will affect the overall standing of the company, and that is why the company prefers to go for buyback. Even the shareholders will agree to go for the buyback क्योंकि उनकी भी मार्केट वैल्यू, उनके शेयर्स की मार्केट वैल्यू, उनके अर्निंग कैपेसिटी, ये सब कुछ इंक्रीज हो जाता है. Okay, next is to return surplus funds to shareholders. Now, what are surplus funds? Over the year, the company keeps on making profits. उन सारे profits को collect करके जो एवरी ईयर उनके रिजर्व्स में या प्रॉफिट अकाउंट में ट्रांसफर होते जाता है, दैट कीप्स ऑन इंक्रीजिंग. सो ऑब्वियसली यहाँ पर अगर लायबिलिटीज पर प्रॉफिट्स इंक्रीज होंगी तो एसेट पर भी देयर हैज टू बी एन इफेक्ट ऑन द एसेट्स ऑल्सो. सो एसेट्स आर ऑल्सो इंक्रीजिंग इन द बार्गेन. सो मे बी द कंपनी हैज अ लॉट ऑफ कलेक्टेड कैश और बैंक और इन सम अदर फॉर्म ऑफ एसेट्स, डिपॉजिट्स वगैरह, which is now surplus. They feel that instead of going on collecting this and just showing increase in the assets, why not give it to the shareholders? Because you don't know what will happen tomorrow. कल suppose कंपनी में कुछ प्रॉब्लम हुआ, losses हुए, तो ये funds कम हो जाएंगे. Then the shareholders might not even get what they have invested in the company. So the directors feel that आज अगर कंपनी के पास एक्स्ट्रा सरप्लस फंड्स हैं तो क्यों नहीं हम उन्हें शेयर होल्डर्स में ही बांट दें, so that they get the benefit of that today itself. So जो सरप्लस फंड्स है वो हम कैसे देंगे शेयर होल्डर्स को? We don't want to give them big dividends. So instead of that, what we do is we do a buyback. So जो भी हमारे एक्स्ट्रा फंड्स है, we use it to pay back my shareholders. Okay, so that is also another reason why companies go for buyback. Then another reason is to provide exit route to the shareholders. What is exit route? Exit route is a chance to go out of the company easily. Suppose market price of the shares, for some reason the company is doing good business, but the market price of the shares is not increasing only, it is stuck somewhere because of various other outside reasons which are not directly related to my business or the way I am doing my business. The shareholders feel that their money is stuck. वो पैसा बिजनेस में डाल के फंस गए हैं क्योंकि मार्केट में वो शेयर्स बेच ही नहीं सकते बिकॉज मार्केट वैल्यू उसकी बहुत कम है. सो देन द कंपनी गिव्स देम एन एग्जिट रूट. सो इफ आई गिव देम अ चांस टू बाय बैक, they can easily sell off at least some part of the shares, okay, so that their money is not completely stuck. So this is in the interest of the shareholders. Most of the buyback reasons that we list down are always in the interest of the shareholders. Otherwise shareholders मानेंगे ही नहीं buyback के लिए. If the company is doing very good, they don't want to give away their shares, they will obviously not accept the buyback offer. The company can only make an offer for buyback. They cannot force the shareholders to sell their shares back. Okay? So if the picture is very rosy like this, when the EPS is increasing, the NAV, that is the net asset value, is increasing, और funds मिल रहे हैं उनको extra, या फिर एक exit का chance मिल रहा है, exit route मिल रहा है, it is only in these situations where the shareholders will actually agree that yes, I am ready to sell back the shares to the company. So this is to give you a gist of what is buyback, how it is done, and why it is done. Okay. Now let us see how buyback is different from redemption. We have already done in some earlier semesters what is redemption of preference shares. We know there are two types of shares which a company issues, equity and preference. So preference shares जब हमने किया था, we had done redemption of preference shares. So now let us see how these two are different. So the first point is that buyback can be of any shares. Buyback equity shares का भी कर सकते हैं हम, और preference shares में भी buyback is possible. See, we know कि preference shares में एक redemption का date होता है. उस date से पहले अगर company को preference shares balance sheet से हटा देने हैं, then they can go for buyback of preference shares also. So buyback can be of any shares, but redemption is only of preference shares. हम equity shares में कभी भी redemption नहीं कर सकते. Okay? Redemption is what? Paying back the amount. Okay? Maturity पे amount वापस दे देना is called redemption. So that is possible only for preference shares, not equity shares. Second point is that for buyback, the date is undecided. जब हम equity shares issue करते हैं, as I said in the earlier part also, that when the company starts, we issue shares. जब equity shares issue करते हैं, तब date decide नहीं होती कि कितने वक्त तक those equity shares will stay in our balance sheet. It is still the company functions. Equity shares तो balance sheet में दिखने ही वाले हैं. So we don't know company 5 साल चलेगी, 10 साल चलेगी, 100 साल चलेगी. So at the time of issuing equity shares, I cannot say that इतने साल में हम उसका buyback कर देंगे. That is not possible. So buyback का date is not decided beforehand. But for redemption, the date is always pre-decided. जब हम preference shares issue करते हैं, we know that the preference shares are going to be for say 10 years. तो पता है कि 10 साल के बाद उसे redeem करना ही पड़ेगा. The company has to be prepared that on this date I will have to redeem my preference shares. I will need to follow the formalities and keep some amount ready to pay to the preference shareholders. So it is pre-decided. पहले से decide किया हुआ है कब redeem होंगे. Next is buyback is governed by SEBI. What is SEBI? Securities and Exchange Board of India. This is an organization which looks after the interest of the investors. वो investors को protect करते हैं ताकि कोई भी company investors को cheat नहीं कर सके. So they have made some rules that issue करे shares, तब क्या follow करना है, this should be, what formalities have to be done. There are certain percentage you have to transfer to some accounts and all. So there are various rules. It's a big fat list of rules which is given by SEBI. So buyback के सारे rules SEBI के अंदर listed है, but redemption of preference shares is not governed by SEBI. इसके rules हमें SEBI में नहीं मिलेंगे. Okay? Next is what is the source of buyback? हम buyback बहुत सारे sources से करेंगे and this will be one topic which we will be doing completely separately. Source क्या होता है? Because our main chapter is buyback. So obviously हम source detail में study करेंगे, but just to know, for buyback I can use my security premium account and I can use my free reserves. Now you've already done your final accounts of companies, so you know what is security premium. जब हम कोई security जैसे shares है, debentures है, if we sell it at a rate higher than the face value, it is called premium. So ऐसी सारी securities जो भी हमारी securities है, bonds, debentures, shares, इन सब का premium मिला के we put it in one account which is called securities premium. So for buyback I can use that account, plus I can use my free reserves. Okay, what are free reserves? Big list of free reserves we'll be doing in a little while. But for redemption, I can only use divisible profits. Divisible profits are those which I can use for paying dividend. So जो profit हम dividend के लिए use कर सकते हैं, वो profit हम redemption के लिए use कर सकते हैं, और कोई profits हम यहाँ पर use नहीं कर सकते. Next point is, what are the sections of your Companies Act? We know Companies Act, old Companies Act was 1956. It has gone a complete change, and now we have a new Companies Act 2013. So section 68 of the Companies Act looks after buyback, whereas section 80 and 80A of the Companies Act looks after redemption. And the last point is, how do we adjust the premium? So buyback का premium कहाँ पर adjust करना है? See, as we issue shares, हम issue भी premium पर करते हैं कभी, we saw that over here. Similarly, buyback भी only if I will give shareholders a rate higher than their face value, तभी वो मानेंगे buyback के लिए. Though buyback is possible at discount also, but that is basically theoretical. Generally buyback हमेशा premium पर ही होगा. Okay, so that premium कहाँ adjust करना है, कौन से account से premium निकालना है, वो buyback के लिए Companies Act में नहीं दिया गया है. But for redemption, the Companies Act specifies that the premium has to be adjusted out of profits. Okay, so this is basically a distinction between redemption and buyback. Because you've done redemption earlier, I just wanted to give you a picture that how it is different from buyback. Just take this down and then we'll go ahead further. Now let's look at the sources from which we can do buyback. Buyback करने के लिए obviously you need funds. But there are also specified sources. जैसे अगर कंपनी के पास profits है, तो we can do a buyback. So that is my first source, which is free reserves. Okay. Now I have made you a comparison between what reserves you can use. So reserves available for buyback and reserves not available for buyback. So even in our sums, we will have a list of reserves. हमारे पास एक बैलेंस शीट होगी या एक लिस्ट होगा जिसमें बहुत सारे reserves दिए होंगे. So there might be some reserves which you can not use. So it is important to know that which reserves I will be able to use for my buyback, which reserves I will not be able to use. So here these are reserves which are general reserves. जो हमारी day to day profits होती है business में, उससे जो reserve हम create करते हैं, reserve is a accumulated profit. So those reserves are available for buyback. So profit and loss account, obviously, sometimes the company does not transfer the profit to any other reserve, but profit and loss account में ही हर साल का profit add होते जाता है. So P&L account में जो भी balance है, easily I can use that full amount for buyback. Same way, general reserve. Sometimes instead of keeping the profit in profit and loss account, company prefers to transfer a part of the profit to general reserve. General reserve is not as free as profit and loss. Profit and loss हम कहीं भी कैसे भी use कर सकते हैं. General reserve में there are a little slightly more restrictions. But for buyback, full general reserve you can use. Same way, this is just another name for general reserve. It can also be called revenue reserve. So these are different names which will be given in the sum. No need to get confused. These both are almost the same. Then you have another reserve which is called dividend equalization or fluctuation reserve. Sometimes a company creates a reserve ताकि हर साल का dividend almost same रहे. So dividend equalization means in order to be able to pay equal dividend, almost equal dividend every year, this reserve is created. Again, it's a free reserve. I can use it for buyback. Sinking fund. समटाइम्स वी क्रिएट अ फंड ताकि फ्यूचर के एक्सपेंसेस हम कवर कर सके. सो इफ द फंड इज जनरल, ओपन, it is called sinking fund. That is also available for your buyback. Investment allowance reserve, if it is free, that means this reserve is actually created under the Income Tax Act. This was an old section of the Income Tax Act जहां पर हमें ये reserve create करना पड़ता था. Now it is an old section, वो section निकल गया है, but still some companies have maintained this reserve. So if this reserve is free to be used, means income tax के हमने सारे formalities complete कर दिए हैं, and now this reserve is just for the namesake in my balance sheet, then it becomes free to be used and I can use it for buyback. Now these are positive balances, that means they are credit balances. Now we know that sometimes in the balance sheet डेबिट साइड पे कुछ लॉसेस होते हैं. इवन दो क्रेडिट साइड पे प्रॉफिट्स दिख रहे हैं, डेबिट साइड पे कुछ ऐसे एक्सपेंसेस या डिफर्ड रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंसेस, इफ यू रिमेंबर फ्रॉम योर कैपिटल एंड रेवेन्यू चैप्टर इन द अर्लियर सेमेस्टर्स, वहां पर वी हैव डन डिफर्ड रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंसेस, दैट इज शेयर इश्यू एक्सपेंस, डिस्काउंट ऑन इश्यू ऑफ डिबेंचर्स और शेयर्स. These things appear on my debit side, that is asset side of my balance sheet. So they are actually losses. So in profits में से पहले हम ये कुछ जो debit balances हैं वो निकाल देंगे. जैसे कि as I said miscellaneous expense, जो कि हमारा discount है, preliminary expense है, जो भी expense type head है which is on the asset side, that you will have to remove. Then purchased goodwill. There are two types of goodwill. One goodwill is what I create of my own company. मेरी कंपनी का गुडविल मैं रेज करती हूँ, क्रिएट करती हूँ और वो अपने बुक्स में लाती हूँ. That is created goodwill. Another is जब मैं किसी और कंपनी का गुडविल परचेज करती हूँ. So purchased goodwill I have to remove it from my reserves because it is not directly the profit of my company. It is some other company's reputation which I am using. So वो निकाल देना पड़ेगा. Then if there are any contingent liabilities, what are contingent liabilities? जो liabilities हमें sure नहीं है कि हमें भरनी पड़ेगी या अगर भरनी पड़े तो क्या amount भरना पड़ेगा, that is not sure. Such liabilities are called contingent liabilities. So सारी contingent liabilities हमें minus नहीं करनी है, only those which have actually become payable. जैसे सपोज हमने किसी के लिए गारंटी दी थी, किसी और ने लोन लिया था, हमने गारंटी दी थी, that becomes my contingent liability because अगर वो इंसान लोन नहीं भर सकेगा तो obviously I will be liable to pay that for him because I have given a guarantee. So suppose उस इंसान ने लोन नहीं भरा and now I have to pay it. So my contingent liability becomes payable. So only the payable part of the contingent liability I will subtract. And any reduction in the value of assets. Sometimes my land and building suppose है हमारे पास, books में दिख रहा है 10 lakhs, but I know that उसकी actual value गिर गई है, it has become only 8 lakhs. So जो 2 लाख का difference है, I know for sure that इस asset की value कम हो गई है. Such sure reduction in the asset will also have to be subtracted. Okay, so after I add all my profits, I subtract these certain losses and expenses. वो जो net amount मेरे पास है, that is available to me for buyback. Now what is not available? We have certain capital reserves जो हमारे daily business का profit नहीं है, but it is a profit because of some asset या revaluation. So these are all in the nature of capital reserves not related to your business. So this is a list of those reserves which are not available. Capital reserve, revaluation reserve, profit on forfeited shares. जब हम shares forfeit करते हैं, we've done this again in issue of shares. What are forfeited shares? जो shareholder हमें पैसे नहीं दे रहे थे, उनके share हमने जब्त कर लिए and we cancelled it. वो cancellation करने के बाद वही shares मैंने किसी और को बेच दिए और उस बार्गेन में हमें थोड़ा सा प्रॉफिट होता है, विच वी नो वी हैव डन अर्लियर, वी पास्ट एंट्रीज ऑल्सो, एंड दैट प्रॉफिट will not be available for buyback because it is not related to my business, it is related to financing activity, shares. Then any statutory reserve. What are statutory reserve? जो reserve हमें law के अंदर बनाने पड़ते हैं, that is under Income Tax Act or under Companies Act. There are many such acts under which you have to create reserves. जैसे मैंने यहाँ पे example दिया था, this was under income tax. So technically this is also a statutory reserve. But as I said, it is an old reserve जो अभी required नहीं है, and that is why we have listed it here. So one of the example of statutory reserve is here only in the list, export profit reserve. This is also made under income tax. Okay. So these are some reserves which you can't use. Again, debenture redemption reserve, जो reserve हम future में debentures redeem करने के लिए पैसा side में रखा हुआ है, that goes under debenture redemption reserve. So that is not available for buyback. And same way you have capital redemption reserve. Do you remember this reserve from your redemption of preference shares? जब हम preference shares redeem करते हैं तो ये reserve बनता है. Even when we will do buyback of shares, उसकी entries में भी ये reserve बनेगा. So this reserve not available for buyback. So this is just a gist of what is available, what is not available. Take this down, then we go ahead with what are the other two sources of buyback. Okay, so our first source was free reserves, जहाँ पे हमने देख लिया कि कौन से reserves available है, कौन से नहीं है. Second source is my securities premium account. Buyback के लिए specifically the Act, Companies Act says that you can use your securities premium for buyback of shares. What is securities premium? We've already touched upon that. To give you again a quick revision, securities premium is कोई भी security जैसे shares, debentures, bonds, जब company face value से ज़्यादा amount पर issue करती है, that extra amount that we receive is securities premium. Okay, so securities premium I can easily use for buyback, no restriction on that. Third source and the final source is fresh issue of shares or hybrid debt. What is hybrid debt? I'll just tackle in a minute. Fresh issue of shares. For the purpose of buying back shares, I can issue new shares. First thing, it will help me to use it as a source of buyback. Second, I will get money to pay. जब हम shares buyback कर रहे हैं तो हम क्या कर रहे हैं? खरीद रहे हैं. So obviously I will have to make a payment. So we also need money to pay back the shareholders. That is, हम उनसे खरीद रहे हैं shares, तो we'll have to pay. So ये fresh issue हमें पैसे भी देगा in order to be able to pay. So it serves double purpose. So fresh issue of shares में condition क्या है? That if I am buying back equity shares, I cannot make fresh issue of equity shares. It has to be of preference shares. So the fresh issue has to be of different kind of shares. Okay, it cannot be same. अगर मुझे प्रेफरेंस शेयर्स बायबैक करने हैं तो मैं इक्विटी शेयर्स इश्यू करूंगी, इक्विटी शेयर्स बायबैक करने हैं तो मैं प्रेफरेंस शेयर इश्यू करूंगी. सो दैट इज अनदर कंडीशन. अनदर थिंग व्हिच आई कैन इश्यू इज अ हाइब्रिड डेट. व्हाट इज अ हाइब्रिड डेट? इट इज इन द नेचर ऑफ अ डेट, दैट इज अ लोन. डिबेंचर्स बोलो या बॉन्ड्स बोलो, एंड देयर आर मेनी अदर डेट इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स व्हिच अ कंपनी कैन इश्यू. But what is hybrid? Future में जाके after a few years that debt will become capital. That is, it will convert into shares. So instead of issuing pure shares, I can issue a hybrid debt जो future में shares बन जाएंगे. फिलहाल it is a loan, I will have to pay interest on it. In the future, it can be converted into shares. So these are your three main sources of buyback. So when we'll be doing the sums, we will have to see कि हमारे पास क्या source available है. या तो fresh issue दिया हुआ है या फिर fresh issue नहीं है तो I will have to use only the free reserves and the security premium. So that is about sources of your buyback. Okay. Now because buyback is covered under SEBI regulations, it is also covered under the Companies Act. Companies Act में mention किया है buyback, we've already seen earlier. That is why there are some conditions that you have to fulfill before you can undertake a buyback of shares. So the first one is, it should be authorized by the Articles of Association of the company. We know what is Articles of Association? It is a list of rules of the company when it is dealing with the outsiders. So Articles of Association में mention होना चाहिए कि कंपनी को जब भी जरूरत होगी it will buy back its shares. If that mention is not there, first हमें articles change करना पड़ेगा, then only we can carry out the buyback. So that is first condition. Second is, there has to be a resolution in the meeting. Now what is a resolution? It is a decision that you take in the meeting. Now if the buyback is for more than 10% of the capital, जो भी capital हम buyback कर रहे हैं या तो equity या preference, अगर उसका 10% से ज़्यादा है, then the resolution will be a special resolution and it will be passed by the shareholders. Okay, so special resolution is when at least 75% of the shareholders agree to the decision. That is the special resolution. So अगर हमारा buyback 10% से ज़्यादा capital का है, then shareholders will have to pass a special resolution. Otherwise, if it is less than 10%, then directors can also pass a resolution in their board meeting. But resolution के बिना you cannot go ahead. For company matters, anything has to be first authorized by a resolution. Only then you can execute it. The third condition is, it should not be for more than 25% of capital and reserves. Now this is a condition which we will be considering when we do our sums. Sums में भी ये condition हम apply करेंगे. But for now what you have to understand, पहले हम एक list बनाते हैं कि हमारा total capital कितना है. उसमें उस capital में हम दोनों लेते हैं, equity capital भी लेंगे, preference भी लेंगे. Total capital plus जो भी हमारे reserves, जो available reserves है वो. So उसका total करके उसका 25%. उसके नीचे ही होना चाहिए buyback. It cannot be more than 25% of capital and reserve. So that is another condition. Next condition is that in a particular year, in 1 year, not more than 25% of paid up capital. वो हम जो capital buyback कर रहे हैं, जैसे अगर equity कर रहे हैं, तो equity capital का 25% से ज़्यादा हम किसी भी year में buyback नहीं कर सकते. So that this condition also we will be tackling when we do our sums. Sums में हम एक format बनाते हैं जिसमें these two conditions will be taken care of. Next is, shares should be fully paid up. हमें पता है कि when we issue shares, we take the share money in parts. We've done this in earlier semesters when we were doing issue of shares. We used to be given a list. 10 रुपए का share है, 2 rupees on application, 2 rupees on allotment and so on. We've done that. Breakup होता है एक share के amount का. So shares fully paid up होने चाहिए. 10 रुपए के share है तो my full 10 rupees should have been recovered from the shareholders. Only such shares I can buy back. So now how are we going to use this in our sum? हमें suppose sum में दिया है that 8000 share है, 10 रुपए के हैं, but only rupees say 5 paid up. Then first we will have to make our shares fully paid. उसका call करेंगे, पैसे लेंगे, only then we will go ahead with the buyback procedure in that sum. So that's one condition. Another condition, this is all procedural condition now. Time gap, दो buyback के बीच का time gap 1 साल से कम नहीं हो सकता. So मैंने अगर आज एक buyback complete किया, मेरा next buyback का offer letter जो मैं भेजूंगी, that has to be after 1 year only. So the time gap between two buybacks has to be clear cut 1 year. Next is, अगर मैंने buyback का proceeding आज शुरू किया, then I have to complete all the formalities of buyback. जो भी formalities है, payments है, everything has to be settled within 12 months. Okay, so these are procedurals. And next is SEBI regulations. There is a long list in the SEBI regulations, but two which we can understand and remember is, one is we have to file a declaration of solvency. किसके साथ ये फाइल करना है? Registrar of Companies, that is ROC, and second is with your SEBI. What is declaration of solvency? That company के पास buyback का पैसा भरने के लिए funds है. That is your declaration of solvency. And the second is that जितना भी मेरा buyback है, उसका एक certain percentage I have to deposit in a separate account, which is called escrow account. Escrow account means it is a normal bank account, but वो specific चीज के लिए ही use कर सकते हैं. That is why it is given the name escrow. Okay, so ये दो conditions are relevant for us. That's why I am discussing that. Otherwise, there is a whole list of SEBI regulations which you have to follow. So just quickly glance through these conditions and take them down, and we'll just cover a small topic after that. Now, just to wind it up, after buyback क्या करना पड़ता है कंपनी को, that is also given under your act. First is obviously you have to cancel the shares. Earlier जब share certificates होते थे in the physical form, the companies used to actually take the share certificates and destroy them. Okay, but now because there is a demat account system, what happens is that company जो हमारे demat के जो IPs रहते हैं, जो demat shares हमारे लिए deal करते हैं, so उनको एक list दे देंगे कि ये shares के numbers जो हैं वो cancel कर दो ताकि आपके system से means वो हटा दो. So those shares cannot be bought and sold in the future. So that is what is done now. Now next is no fresh issue till 23 months. बायबैक के वक्त हमने एक फ्रेश इश्यू किया, वो तो अलग शेयर्स का किया था. सो इवन आफ्टर बायबैक, सपोज मैंने इक्विटी शेयर्स अगर बायबैक किए हैं तो मैं अगले 23 मंथ्स तक नए इक्विटी शेयर्स इश्यू नहीं कर सकती. ओके, सो दैट इज अनदर थिंग व्हिच यू हैव टू रिमेंबर आफ्टर बायबैक. बट आई कैन इश्यू बोनस शेयर्स. सो इक्विटी शेयर्स बायबैक कर दिए और तुरंत I can issue some other equity shares as bonus without taking money from the shareholders. Free shares, bonus shares I can issue. या फिर अगर मेरे कुछ ऐसे debentures हैं या preference shares हैं जिन्हें convert करना है equity shares में, so that is also possible. You can do that after a buyback. But fresh issue पैसे लेकर हम नहीं कर सकते till 23 months. So these are the three things that a company has to remember once the buyback is over. So that's it for this session. You can take these conditions down, okay, and just go through whatever we have done today so that you are ready to actually now go for the practical part of buyback. Thank you.